Red flag laws.
Background checks.
Take weapons of war off our streets.
Close to 80% of Americans do not believe that these weapons of war should be in private hands and in community hands.
Pull.
Nevadans like Don Turner like their guns.
That's how it's done.
Turner is the president of the Nevada Firearms Coalition, a group of around 36,000 NRA members in a state with one of the highest rates of gun ownership.
Not your first time?
No, not my first time.
So we were talking a bit about solutions and exactly how to address gun violence in the U.S. You've mentioned that gun confiscation you don't feel is the way to go.
The thing is that we need to find a solution to what's causing these problems. Gun confiscation, gun restriction, when you have so much of a population that owns firearms that never violates the law, is the wrong bug to smash.
People don't care about gun violence until it reaches their steps. And I want to help the cause to not getting into their steps.
I came up with the name Brave because that's what these kids have to be in order to stand up for justice and peace and speak out on what's going on in their society.
Like I said, I've been a part of Brave for years, and we've been doing different things for years. We even had a press conference where we had literally no press. And to finally be on the national stage and people finally listening to Chicago's problems.
When I say I'm from Chicago, the first thing that they say is like, oh my God, like how is it living there? And it's like we're living in a war zone.
What do the young people of Chicago affected by this need from the rest of us that they're not getting?
Oh, they need mental health services.
When you talk about violence, when you talk about crime, those are foremost on everybody's mind here. I think a lot of times when people talk about Chicago, they think that nobody is fighting back. They think that nobody cares about the things that are happening in the city, and that's because they're not talking to people from Chicago. The reputation that this city takes on, like we're swimming in violence and we're not doing anything about it, is absolutely false. We wake up and fight every day, and it's a fight that I know that we're going to win because we're that strong. It may not be covered when we win it, but we're going to win it.
Started right here, right now. Started right here, right now. We choose to make the necessary changes in our lives. Started right here, right now. Started right here, right now. Started right here, right now. We choose to make the necessary changes in our lives.
Cook County Jail in Chicago houses a little over 6,000 inmates on a daily basis. More than 30% of those inmates have some sort of mental health issue.
If ever there is a statement of just how screwed up our society is, I'm running arguably the largest mental health hospital in the country, and I'm a history major.
These jobs still need to be done. People need to have a living wage. And when you don't have a living wage, it just means the rest of us have to pay for your business.
I want it now, but I can live with the 2021.
Johnson is part of Fight for 15, a group of fast food workers who began the push for $15 an hour in 2012.
You don't have to worry about, I'm gonna pay this bill on time, I'm gonna pay my rent first. It doesn't make sense for us to be struggling while McDonald's steady gets richer and richer off our hard work.
Americans under 30 now view socialism more positively than capitalism. According to political science professor Chiara Cordelli, that's partly because younger generations did not grow up during the Cold War.
There is, of course, the environment that is a central concern for this generation in a way that it wasn't in the past.
Climate change has got to go! We are in the heart of downtown Chicago, and as you can hear, it's pretty noisy. On one side, there are people chanting and drumming, and on the other side, there is a crowd cheering for the organizers of this event. They are pushing for action on climate change. And a lot of this was led by high school students. A lot of them skipped class to come here to protest the inaction on climate change.
You can kind of see the water on the edges, but 3,000 feet of our runway was underwater. Over the next 5 to 7 days, and that's what you see what's left of it, and it's still going down. On the other side of that runway, literally, is the Missouri River.
At its worst, roughly 1.2 million square feet of it was underwater.
And you can kind of see we've cleaned up some of the areas here, but everything we're driving through right now was under anywhere between 1.5 feet to some places up to 8 to maybe 10 feet of water.
I think I'm 8.
These 4 volunteers didn't lose any of their own belongings in the March floods that hit Nebraska and Iowa, but they've been trying to save as many animals from the high waters as they can.
It's been so busy, I haven't had time to think about it. A lot of days of just not even eating. Don't have time.
We spent 2 days with volunteers from a small rescue called Muddy Paws Second Chance. Before the floods, the group helped with vet bills or fostered dogs or cats in their homes. But since the water rose, they estimate they've saved more than 200 farm animals and pets from drowning, starving, or getting lost in the elements. Justin Mensick says he and his family are some of the lucky ones here. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture has put the initial estimate in damages from these floods at around $400 million in lost livestock and $400 million in damages to crops.
Financially, it's a big thing because cows are not very cheap animal to buy, I guess you'd say. There's always lots of costs involved with having livestock.
If we do nothing, sea levels rise, energy gets pumped into the oceans, that pumps energy into the atmosphere. The extremes of weather become more significant, and it'll become the new normal.
They want to push their local politicians, their state politicians, and even those lawmakers at the federal level to take action and pass legislation on climate change.
1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8.
Jackson Potter teaches history and is part of the Chicago Teachers Union bargaining team. He has seen firsthand how homelessness impacts students.
We care deeply about our students, and when they're homeless and their families don't have a stable place to raise them, it has all kinds of repercussions for health, attention, self-worth.
In January of 2019, 25 schools had between 75 and 139 homeless students.
It's definitely hard to focus on any midterms, any quizzes that had to come up, because I was focusing more on the safety of my family as to where we were gonna go.
At Indian boarding schools, students were prevented from speaking anything other than English.
Native children who spoke their tribal languages rather than English would receive poison placed on their tongues to burn their tongues. There was rampant sexual and physical abuse for identifying in any sort of way with their cultural practices, including language or spirituality, but also with just breaking the rules.
One thing I remember as a child was that we were taught to hide, and she was so afraid that someone, the government or whoever the powers to be, were going to come and grab us.
Ron Yob grew up in this small home in downtown Grand Rapids in the 60s. Before he even learned how to walk, his mother, Angeline Kelsey, taught him and his siblings to be prepared if a person in uniform showed up at their door.
Tillery admits that a major obstacle to reparations is the country's growing debt, which is currently at $22 trillion. But he says funding is possible by reducing the $640 billion defense budget and adopting what he calls a fairer tax system.
If we don't get to fully fleshed out policy proposals in this campaign, then perhaps we will if one of them wins the White House, and perhaps we will in the next campaign. Change is always incremental.
Well, one of the important bedrocks of how we approach things through the Times Up Legal Defense Fund is this is about making sure that victims have their own agency.
Believing as I do in the power of music, to think that somebody used it to ruin lives, that kills me. That just absolutely kills me. The founders of Mute R. Kelly did with that hashtag is unite people.
Well, Jim's work really served as almost the seminal evidence for us to do this to the degree that we've done it.
Mute R. Kelly is a hashtag, but the women behind it took the fight offline, staging protests at Kelly's concerts, confronting radio DJs, and circulating petitions.
Are we ready? Yeah!
Jasmine Marie Cruz wants you to see that today's youth take action.
I think it's important that Chicago's youth activism scene is well represented here because it's so strong and the youth are so powerful here.
This is what democracy looks like.
There are about 150 to 200 attendees, despite the winter weather. The majority are young people, and they say that it's time for their voices to be heard.
You know, the business of Hollywood is very challenging. The business of art is very challenging. And so the things that gave me fuel and made me excited was going around those gatekeepers that said, hey, I don't understand you and really we don't have a place for you. And saying, you know what, you might not have a place for me, but I will make a place for myself.
I kind of fell into politics by accident. We found my predecessor and said, you know, there's some things here that are really out of step with the district. I tried getting in touch with him about some of the things that we cared about, and there was just no response at all.
When Chung couldn't find anyone else to run against the three-term incumbent state representative Hal Slager, he ran for office. Meet Chris Chung. He's the youngest Indiana State Assemblyman elected last year, and he's also the first Korean American in the state's legislature.
It's very cool. I mean, just to be able to have this opportunity, I still can't get over it, and being on the floor when all of this important legislation is passing, and it's very neat.
Sorry, but I have to tell you the truth. I never thought that he's going to win.
Meet Sang Chung, Chris Chung's mother. And then this even says it was a tight race.
Yes, and this was the election day, the Hamilton Times newspaper that I got scrapbook.
Straws have become one of the latest targets of eco-activism. But for some people with disabilities, they're an integral part of daily life.
I use straws to create something to drink. I use them in the morning when I'm brushing my teeth. I use them at lunch, at dinner, pretty much any time I'm taking a sip of something. Maybe I can't use my hands to drink things. So if I want to ever have a drink by myself, I put a straw.
In high-risk pregnancies, it may be necessary to incorporate input from a different specialist. It may be important to get additional screening for the baby. It may be necessary to get additional screening for mom. Making plans, scheduling her induction at a time when it's most feasible for the pediatrician who may need to do surgery on this baby at the time of delivery.
It's like something stabbing you in your bone, just like repeatedly, and you can't stop it. And it's just like, it's something that makes you really tense and you just can't move. It's been a part of my life since I was 6 months old.
23-year-old Maya Washington has been living with sickle cell, a lifelong invisible disease. It's a disorder with no visibly detectable signs and not often talked about. Some Black patients say that bias persists in medicine because sickle cell patients visit the emergency room an average of 3 times a year. They're often assumed to be addicts for seeking drugs to ease their pain.
I've had doctors give me an inappropriate amount of medicine that wasn't helping, that kind of basically looked at me as like, you know, drug seeking or just not like faking it.
I gotta pick. I gotta choose. I leave the country and go over there and see what happens, or I stay here and take care of my son. So I just choose to stay here, take care of my son.
Miguel Martinez Valdez came to the US illegally from Mexico over 20 years ago and has been undocumented ever since, trying unsuccessfully for over a decade to adjust his status.
You know who she is, right? Yes.
That's despite the fact that he's long been married to a US citizen and has 2 kids who are also citizens. One of them was diagnosed with leukemia as a toddler.
The rescheduled ICE raids are expected to happen on Sunday in at least 10 major US cities, including here in Chicago.
And we want people to know, one, they should not open the door to an ICE agent unless that ICE agent has a warrant signed by a judge.
I went to one of those sessions in this high school behind me, and even though I wasn't able to film it, I did talk to a local activist about how she witnessed her husband's arrest by ICE 2 years ago and what she learned from it. ¿Cómo reaccionarás de manera diferente hoy si los agentes de ICE llamaran a tu puerta?
Si supiera que fueran ellos, no abriría la puerta.
Recreational cannabis just became legal in Illinois, but advocates say immigrants should stay away.
People are going to say,
it's legal. So yes, it's fine. Like I used or I possessed, and then they can be detained, they can be deported.
They worry the new law could become a trap for uninformed non-citizens, whether they're long-time green card holders or undocumented.
They knew what was the charge. They could ask me if I possessed it, and I admitted. Because I was nervous. I was like, should I lie? Should I say the truth? I said the truth, you know. Just for that, I was an extreme danger to society.
On the application, it asks, have you ever been convicted of, of a crime? For all other purposes, they don't have to disclose that, but for immigration, they do. And so that's something that the federal government can say, you're committing fraud, or you're not telling the full truth.
There's some people say, well, nothing we can do about it, so let's just keep doing. These are what.
Is that the case?
You lose these islands, and then you have a refugee problem. And this destabilizes regions, as we've known and has been demonstrated ever since the history of war and refugees.
Parce que si je refusais aller travailler avec ce groupe, on voulait même me tuer.
For Matenga, the country was Burundi, where doctors diagnosed his daughter with a rare disorder that required urgent leg surgery abroad.
Les médecins ont décidé que l'enfant ne peut pas être soigné ici en Afrique.
The place I was born and the restaurants I like to eat, and introduce him to some of my family members and show him a story of what happened. We had the cameras, but we were planning to do that for the show or without the show.
We're making arepas. Arepas is a traditional breakfast.
Ana Gil Garcia and Ana Salazar are two Venezuelan cousins sharing a home and a kitchen in Chicago.
This is Venezuelan cheese.
While their cooking skills are somewhat similar,
Her arepas are better than mine.
their immigration stories couldn't be more at odds. Gil Garcia moved to the US 40 years ago with her kids because she received a green card and a job offer. At the time, she says, there were only 60 other Venezuelans in the city.
There was no Venezuelan restaurants in Chicago. Now we have 5.
Pancakes, pizza, pajamas, and the Grinch. That's how young Syrian refugees in Chicago are celebrating the holidays.
We're not really sure where that came from, but we've got a lot of requests for pancakes, breakfast for dinner, so we're doing that.
The unique winter celebration is part of an after-school program hosted by a local nonprofit 4 times a week. The Syrian Community Network provides hundreds of recently arrived Syrian families with the tools to become self-sufficient in the US. And key to that mission is securing the future of the community's youngest members.
These children, if they are successful in school, if they are the next doctors, pharmacists, teachers, lawyers, this will be the success of all of Chicago.
It's not a way away from broadcast. It's in support of what I hope will be broadcast for another 10 or 15 years. It's not going away tomorrow.
I think newspapers are having a hard time adapting at the moment. That doesn't necessarily mean they won't adapt.
Like Ballesteros, Manny Ramos is also a reporter and a member of Report for America, a nonprofit organization that sends reporters to work at hard-hit newspapers across the country. Much like Teach for America, it's a call to service and perhaps a solution to struggling newsrooms. But what makes this children's song a global sensation? Stephen Rings, an associate professor of music at the University of Chicago, has a few theories. First of all, the song is an earworm.
So this is a term that music psychologists use for songs that get stuck in your head. And one characteristic of earworms is that they loop.
21-year-old Janelle Rosario is about to get a non-surgical procedure to fill her lips.
Yeah, I did kind of do it to look good in pictures, just because I felt like when I smiled, my top lip kind of disappeared.
This isn't Janelle's first time. She had her lips filled once before.
So I'm making this small entry wound right here and just going like that.
Janelle's lips are being injected by dissolvable fillers. According to Dr. Plasek, the filler is slowly and naturally metabolized by the body.